Chapter 2, Part 1 of Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds by Bernard Lebovier de Fontenelle, translated by William Gardner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The second evening's conversation, that the moon is an inhabited world. The next morning, as soon as anyone could get admittance, I sent to the Countess's apartment to know how she had rested and whether the motion of the earth had not disturbed her. She returned for answer she began to be accustomed to it, and that Copernicus himself had not slept better. Some time after there came some neighbors to dinner, who stayed with her till the evening, according to the tiresome custom in the country. Nay, and they were very obliging in going then, for the country likewise gives a privilege of extending their visit to the next morning, if they are so disposed, and have not the conscience to break up. So the Countess and I found ourselves at liberty in the evening. We went again to the park, and immediately fell upon our systems. She so well retained what I told her the night before, that she desired I would proceed without any repetition. Well, madam, says I, since the sun, which is now immovable, has left off being a planet, and the earth, which turns round him, is now become one, you'll not be surprised when you hear that the moon is an earth too, and an habitable world. I confess, says she, I have often heard talk of the world in the moon, but I always looked upon it as visionary and mere fancy. And, says I, it may be so still. I am in this case as people in a civil war, where the uncertainty of what may happen makes them hold intelligence with the opposite party, and correspond with their very enemies. For though I verily believe the moon is inhabited, I live civilly with those who do not believe it. And I am, like some honest gentlemen in point of religion, still ready to embrace the prevailing opinion. But till the unbelievers have a more considerable advantage, I declare for the inhabitants of the moon. Suppose there had never been any communication between Paris and St. Denis, and a Cockney who was never beyond the walls of his own city saw St. Denis from the towers of Notre Dame. You ask him if he believes St. Denis is inhabited as Paris is. He presently answers boldly, no, for, says he, I see very well the people at Paris, but those at St. Denis I don't see at all, nor did I ever hear of any there. 'Tis true, you tell him, that from the towers of Notre Dame he cannot perceive any inhabitants of St. Denis, because of the distance, but all that he does discover of St. Denis very much resembles what he sees at Paris, the steeples, houses, walls, so that it may very well be inhabited as Paris is. All this signifies nothing. My Cockney still maintains that St. Denis is not inhabited, because he sees nobody there. The moon is our St. Denis, and every one of us is like this Parisian Cockney, who never went out of his own city. You are too severe, says she, upon your fellow citizens. We are not all sure so silly as your Cockney. Since St. Denis is just like Paris, he is a fool if he does not think it inhabited. But the moon is not at all like the earth. Take care what you say, madam, replied I, for if the moon resembles the earth, you are under a necessity to believe it inhabited. If it be so, says she, I own I cannot be dispensed from believing it, and you seem so confident of it that I fear I must, whether I will or no. 'Tis true the two motions of the earth, which I could never imagine till now, do a little stagger me as to all the rest. But yet, how is it possible the earth should enlighten as the moon does, without which they cannot be alike? If that be all, says I, the difference is not great, for 'tis the sun which is the sole fountain of light. That quality proceeds only from him, and if the planets give light to us, it is because they first receive it from the sun. The sun sends light to the moon, and she reflects it back on the earth. The earth in the same manner receives light from the sun, and sends it to the moon, for the distance is the same between the earth and the moon, as between the moon and the earth. But, says the Countess, is the earth as fit to send back the light of the sun as the moon is? You are altogether for the moon, says I. She is much obliged to you, but you must know that light is made up of certain little balls, which rebound from what is solid, but pass through what admits of entrance in a right line, as air or glass. So that what makes the moon enlighten us is that she is a firm and solid body, from which the little balls rebound, and we must deny our senses if we will not allow the earth the same solidity. In short, the difference is how we are seated, for the moon being at so vast a distance from us, we can only discover her to be a body of light, and don't perceive that she is a great mass, altogether like the earth. Whereas on the contrary, because we are so near the earth, we know her to be a great mass, proper for the furnishing provision for animals, but don't discover her to be a body of light, for want of the due distance. It is just so with us all, says the Countess. We are dazzled with the quality and fortune of those who are above us, when do but examine things nicely, and we are all upon a level. It's very true, says I. We would judge of all things, but still stand in the wrong places. We are too near to judge of ourselves, and too far off to know others. So that the true way to see things as they are is to be between the moon and the earth, to be purely a spectator of this world, and not an inhabitant. I shall never be satisfied, says she, for the injustice we do the earth, and the too favourable opinion we have of the moon, till you assure me that the inhabitants of the moon are as little acquainted with their advantages as we are with ours, and that they take our earth for a planet, without knowing theirs is one too. Don't doubt it, says I. We appear to them to perform very regularly our function of a planet. 'Tis true, they don't see us make a circle round them, but that is no great matter. That half of the moon which was turned towards us at the beginning of the world has been turned towards us ever since. The eyes, mouth, and face which we have fancied of the spots in her are still the same, and if the other opposite half should appear to us, we should no doubt fancy another figure from the different spots that are in it. Not but that the moon turns upon herself, and in the same time that she turns round the earth, that is, in a month, but while she is making that turn upon herself, and that she should hide a cheek, for example, and appear somewhat else to us, she makes a like part of her circle round the earth, and still presents to us the same cheek, so that the moon, who in respect of the sun and stars turns round herself, in respect of us does not turn at all. They seem to her to rise and set in the space of 15 days, but for our earth, it appears to her to be held up in the same place of the heavens. 'Tis true, this apparent immobility is not very agreeable to a body which should pass for a planet, but it is not altogether perfect. The moon has a kind of trembling, which causes a little corner of her face to be sometimes hid from us, and a little corner of the opposite half appears. But then, upon my word, she attributes that trembling to us, and fancies that we have in the heavens the motion of a pendulum, which vibrates to and fro. I find, says the Countess, the planets are just like us. We cast that upon others which is in ourselves. Says the earth, 'tis not I that turn, 'tis the sun. The moon says, 'tis not I that shake, 'tis the earth. There is a great deal of error everywhere. But I would not advise you, says I, to undertake the reforming it. You had better convince yourself of the entire resemblance of the earth and the moon. Imagine then these two great bowls held up in the heavens. You know that the sun always enlightens the one half of a body that is round, and the other half is in the shadow. There is then one half of the earth, and one half of the moon, which is enlightened by the sun. That is, one half which is day, and the other half which is night. Observe also that as a ball has less force after it has been struck against a wall, and rebounds to the other side, so is light weakened when it is reflected. The pale light which comes to us from the moon is the very light of the sun, but it cannot come to us from the moon but by reflection. It has lost much of the force and lustre it had when it came directly from the sun upon the moon. And that bright light which shines directly upon us from the sun, and which the earth reflects upon the moon, is as pale and weak when it arrives there. So that the light which appears to us in the moon, and enlightens our nights, is the part of the moon which has day. And that part of the earth which has day, when it is opposite to the part of the moon which has night, gives light to it. all depends upon how the moon and the earth behold one another. At the beginning of the month, we don't see the moon, because she is between the sun and us. That half of her which has day is then turned towards the sun, and that half which has night turned towards us. We can't see it then, because it has no light upon it. But that half of the moon which has night, being turned to the half of the earth which has day, sees us without being perceived. And we then appear to them, just as the full moon does to us. So that, as I may say, the inhabitants of the moon have then a full earth. But the moon, being advanced upon her circle of a month, comes from under the sun, and begins to turn towards us a little corner of the half which is light. There's the crescent. Then those parts of the moon which have night don't see all the half of the earth which has day, and we are then in the wane to them. I understand you perfectly, says the Countess. Without hesitation, I can comprehend the rest at pleasure, and I have nothing to do but think a moment and bring the moon upon her circle of a month. I see in general that the inhabitants of the moon have a month quite contrary to us. When we have a full moon, their half of the moon which is light is turned to our half of the earth which is dark. They don't see us at all, and they have then a new earth. This is plain. I would not stand the reproach of requiring a long explication on so easy a point. But now tell me, how come the eclipses? You may easily guess that, says I, when it is new moon, that she is between the sun and us, and all her dark half is turned towards us who have light. That obscure shadow is cast upon us. If the moon be directly under the sun, that shadow hides him from us, and at the same time obscures a part of that half of the earth which is light, which was seen by that half of the moon which was dark. Here then is an eclipse of the sun to us during our day, and an eclipse of the earth to the moon during her night. When it is full moon, the earth is between her and the sun, and all the dark half of the earth is turned towards all the light half of the moon. The shadow then of the earth casts itself towards the moon, and if it falls on the moon, it obscures that light half which we see, which then has day, and hinders the sun from shining on it. Here then is an eclipse of the moon to us during our night, and an eclipse of the sun to the moon during her day. But the reason that we have not eclipses every time that the moon is between the sun and the earth, or the earth between the sun and the moon, is because these three bodies are not exactly placed in a right line, and by consequence that which should make the eclipse casts its shadow a little beside that which should be obscured. I am surprised, says the Countess, that there should be so little mystery in eclipses, and that the whole world should not know the cause of them. Nor ever will, says I, as some people go about it. In the East Indies, when the sun and the moon are in eclipse, they believe a certain devil, who has black claws, is seizing on those planets with his talons. And during that time, the rivers are covered with the heads of Indians, who are up to the neck in water, because they esteem it a very devout posture, to implore the sun and the moon to defend them against the devil. In America, they are persuaded that the sun and the moon, when eclipsed, are angry. And what is it they will not do to be reconciled with them? The Greeks, who were so refined, also believed the moon was then enchanted, and that the magicians forced her to descend from heaven, and shed a malignant juice on the plants. Nay, what a panic fear were we in not above 40 years ago at an eclipse of the sun! How many people hid themselves in cellars, and all the philosophers who treated of its cause could not persuade them to come out till the eclipse was over. In good faith, says she, 'tis scandalous for men to be such cowards. There ought to be a general law of mankind to prohibit the discoursing of eclipses, that we might not call to mind the follies that have been said and done upon that subject. Your law then, says I, must abolish even the memory of all things, and forbid us to speak at all, for I know nothing in the world which is not a monument of the folly of man. End of Chapter 2, Part 1.